Welcome back to the Skids and Giggles podcast. I am Pascal, chief instigator of this show and your host. I'm joined by my co-host and our resident engineer, the yin to my yang, the airwolf to my blue thunder, Bryson. How's it going today, buddy?
Yeah, good, Pascal. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Very well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we have something special for our listeners today. It's sort of a special cast. Now, I've been doing a little bit of alternative mountain biking, aka road biking around Switzerland in the past few days, and just trying to get up to some mountain tops and things like that while in between the bouts of the gods in the form of weather. But Pascal, you've been also up in some elevation, but not with a bicycle, or with a bicycle, but actually maybe you should explain this.
Well, it was a slightly different mode of transport to my usual modes of transport. I got the, I guess I would say a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, certainly for myself, to go heli biking. So what that means is instead of using gondolas or a funicular or chairlifts or pedaling yourself or an e-bike or a shuttle, you use a helicopter to gain the elevation and then ride down from wherever you get dropped off, ride back down to heli base, and off you go again.
Right on. Sounds super exciting. I have not done that, but it looks really cool. I've seen a lot of pictures and videos of other trips. Whereabouts? What region were you in?
Well, as our listeners may or may not know, I mean, heli traffic, be it for skiing or for biking or whatever it is relatively limited and restricted. So we crossed the border into Italy, so the northern part of Italy, literally just the other side of Splügen Pass, and so there's a heli base. A friend of a friend of a friend of a friend used to be a helicopter pilot there and knows the operating company there, and he made the connections, to get to book the helicopter. But he also knows his way around the area. He's actually done quite a bit of the exploring of the region in terms of the heli biking. So what that means is kind of like finding out where the good drop-off spots are and where you can actually ride down the mountain on some okay trails. And so he planned the whole trip and then made the introduction to the local helicopter company and sorted that side out for us. So that was good. The whole weekend was actually a birthday trip for our friend Beat, who's the shop wrench at Biroma Bikes. It was a good group of guys. So the usual suspects got together to do this trip, and it was a good time.
Sounds like it would have been a blast. I know some of these guys, and of course they love to ride hard, ride free, and always have a good laugh as well. So now lately you've been riding with flat pedals. This I would expect is a pretty remote region. So what did you choose? The reliability of the flats or the more security of the clips?
Well, actually, I did. I maintained my flats. I was thinking about it to go back to clips, but I was thinking, well, there's going to be some hiker biking. So the second day, there was unfortunately no more helicopters. So we did. There was a bit of a hiker bike in the morning to get back to where the downhill started, and then again moving around the mountainside. You don't really know the terrain, and probably a lot of rocks and slippery stuff. So they're generally a bit better off with the firm-footedness of a regular shoe or flat shoes, and rather than having the ballerina slippers with the cleats at the bottom and slipping out on rocks and stuff, and that's not much fun. So and I don't have dedicated SPD hiking boots type shoes, so the natural pick was to just stick to flat pedals, which was I think the right thing to do in the end.
Definitely. You mentioned a hike-a-bike there, so I mean, in Switzerland, it's not uncommon to find alpine areas where you can go, even sometimes with your bike, and also some other places that you can try to hike into and out. And that basically rings the bell for me. And the keyword there is remote. So you're going to a place where typically, well, maybe not typically, but for a large part, only a helicopter goes. I guess a few people brave taking some sort of small motorized transport up there, but for the convenience, probably a helicopter is most used, which means that you don't get a lot of people coming up either, which means there probably isn't a designated trail builder up there. So what kind of trails would you find?
Yeah, well, I guess the trail builders were, they've been working for centuries and decades, I would think. But yeah, so as you say, right, so the flip side to the ease of access or the remoteness with a helicopter and getting to places where you normally don't get that easily is of course that you won't be finding a nicely groomed bike park. So most of the trails that we rode were old Italian hiking trails, old or well-loved moto tracks or quad tracks that just go up the side of the mountain, and or as it was the case on the second day, that was basically, I think we decided in the end, because we couldn't quite figure it out, but we decided in the end it was some sort of an old goat track or a horse cart track that was used to build the dam that was in that valley. So it was basically, in places maybe 1.5 to 2 meters wide, stone, like almost like a cobblestone street or like a cobblestone path that was put together. And of course, because it's been used for a very long time, and it being Italy, it kind of starts falling apart in some places. In other places, it's still very nice and upkept, and a lot of switchbacks, which obviously was good for on the back of our trip to Squall. There was a lot of practice on the switchback side. So it was good fun. So overall, it's of course very different than if you go to a bike park where you have machine built, wide, purpose-built mountain bike trails with big jumps and nice and flowy, and everything lines up, and you don't need to worry about anything. So yeah, if I look at those 2 days, and as I said, there was like hiking trails, there was quad tracks, there was goat tracks. So that's obviously it's very, very different than if you go to a bike park. That's for sure.
So you mentioned 2 days. I mean, this is a full weekend. If I'm going to spend an evening with these characters, I might not make it down the hill the next day. So how did you survive the night?
Oh, well, yeah, we did. It was, again, we had this friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who knows the area very well, and he had some connections to one of these alpine huts that you find in the Alps, right? So it's like on, 2,100 meters behind a dam, so on the lake of a dam. Very, very nice. A little hut. You got everything you need. It's got a kitchen. It's got a nice oven. It's got running water. It's got solar power. So it's like really, 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 really nice. And the nice thing actually was that it was off grid, so everyone had to put their phones away. So it was actually some really good quality time. And of course, it being on 2,100 meters meant that it gets chilly pretty quickly, and so big bonfires were made, and beers around the fire, and then getting into the house and having a nice big pot of pasta. And then of course, as the evening wore on, there were the odd shenanigans with drinking games and a couple of throwbacks to my ski school days, and a bunch of the guys that were in the group are also ski guides and ski instructors, so they knew the odd game or two, and so it was a good and fun good fun evening. And so then we just stayed the night in the hut, and then the next morning cleaned up after ourselves, and then started to hike a bike from the hut back to the front of the dam where the last downhill started. And the last downhill was I would say we left the dam at around 11, and we were down in the valley in Chiavenna by 2:30. So I mean, it's not like we raced down the hill, but it's just you're riding quite a bit. Of course, you're waiting quite a bit. You're taking breaks, have a little snack, wait for everyone to regroup, and So I mean, where else can you do 3-hour runs, without, I don't know, taking multiples of funiculars or gondolas or long uphill pedals or whatever it is, so I think that was the cool thing, right? So where can you do 2,000 meter downhill runs with a 3-minute uplift apart from heli biking? And it's just not possible, and I think that was the coolest thing.
Right on. So again, we got to drill it home. This is a really remote situation. You mentioned hike a bike again, and your description of the trails, you're definitely correct when you say it's not groomed and prepared like a bike park would be, or even a trail center. Some would even say jank. So just a nod to some of our listeners out there. I want to make sure we have a jargon check in place. So Pascal, what's your definition of jank?
Well, the definition of jank, I mean, you can take it in the literal textbook sense, which is obviously means something is falling apart. It's not quite in its original state. It's generally quite old. Of course, it has its connotations depending on where you ride. If you follow the social media of the Rocky Mountain racing team, then they have their interpretation of jank, which is basically anything that's European, or old alpine trails is generally described as janky. And but I mean, for me personally, janky, I mean, quite in the literal sense. So in this case of the weekend, those hiking trails, they have been in use for decades, if not centuries. In some parts, they're maintained and people are looking after them. In other parts, they're absolutely not. And you have to wade through trees and bushes and stuff to actually find the next section of the trail. And there's hidden rocks and the features don't, or features. It's not necessarily a feature. I mean, maybe 50 years ago it was a staircase, and now it's just a pile of rocks, and somehow you need to find your way down. And so it's not in its original state. It's mostly quite old, and in one way or the other, it's fallen apart a little bit. But on the other hand, if you enjoy that kind of stuff, it's quite interesting and challenging to ride, so I had some good times.
I would definitely be up there trying to pick it apart, trying to see where I could find a little bit of flow through the jank. And there's another jargon word. Oh my gosh, I'm just spewing them out. Dang. Flow.
Oh, flow. So well, that's actually a funny side story. Is that Johnny, the guy that organized the trip, or the guide, if you will. He always talked about, there it is, the second descent, it's quite flowy. And we were like, oh, okay, cool, it's quite flowy. So, got up there, started riding the trail, and it was like this blown out moto track, and of course there was some terrible weather over the last days and weeks before our trip. And, with like hundreds of liters of waters and, rivers flowing down the mountain, and there has been landslides, and there's been some pretty gnarly weather going through that region. And we come to that quad track, and it looks like a blown out riverbed. There's like sandy, loose rocks everywhere. bikes and wheels looked like they've been mauled by a bear afterwards. And yeah, and then they were like riding for 5, riding for 10 minutes, riding for 15 minutes, riding for 20 minutes. And we were like, so when does the flowy part start? And he was just like, well, this is the flowy part. And I was like, well, what do you mean with flow? And then he's like, well, I've heard a lot of mountain bikers talk about flow, and they always thought that means it's fast. And so I mean, generally that's not what we mean when it's flowy. Generally, when we mean it's flowy is that so yes, it can be fast, but generally it means that, the features line up. So let's say take a couple of berms or a couple of jumps or other features like a drop or a rock roll or whatever it is. But generally when we say flow, then we mean that there is a natural course of the trail. So almost like you would run a ball, so you would throw a ball down the trail and that ball would roll down the trail in a natural kind of way. And it's the same as when you ride down the trail, you take that turn and then that lines you up right nicely for the jump, and then you take the jump and that lines you up nicely for the next kind of berm, and that lines you up for the next feature, etc., etc., etc. And that can be fast, but it can be slow. It just generally means that stuff works together, and there's no surprises generally.
So you generate this sort of continuum as you continue down the trail. You're just always going over features, and the speed is, I guess, easily controlled rather than like having to slam on the brakes or having to like have to put a few pedal strokes in to make something. It's sort of carrying you along effortlessly, almost, I guess you could say.
Well, how would you talk about flow?
Actually, I would talk about it in that kind of that yoga sense where it's like you kind of like lose, what is it, the consciousness, like you're in the now, so you don't think about what's happening next. You don't think what's happening before you. You're just as you are. And then when you're bike riding, you can generate that or find it, I guess. I don't know exactly. But some trails can just do that for you. It just, all of a sudden you can look forward and you see everything coming at you and you just go with it. And it could be like something very technical or very steep and scary, but for some reason, it's just the way it comes at you. It's just, you're just able to navigate and you connect. I think that's how I would describe it. So back to that word remote. Now I know you're a native Swiss, and you've definitely been up in the mountains for a large sector of your life, in parts, of course. So you're no stranger to alpine territory and this sort of terrain. After going on this trip where you basically needed a helicopter to reach, and then having such like gnarly descents, having to basically rely on your crew because I don't know if you mentioned it yet, but did you run into anybody?
No, not really. I mean, there was so on the first day that that was literally we got dropped off on an Alp, or refugio as it was. So there was like maybe 2 or 3 guys that spent the summer up there. Then all of a sudden a helicopter shows up and drops off the first crew, and then helicopter leaves again, and then a couple of minutes later helicopter shows up again with the bikes, and then repeats the process, gets the second crew. But yeah, so I mean the funny thing is that people were like super surprised to have a helicopter land on their doorstep on a Saturday afternoon, and secondly also because we came up there with bikes, and they're like, "What the hell are you doing here? I mean, bikes, really? What are you going to do?" And I was like, "Well, we're going to ride down to the valley again." "What? You're riding down here? Oh, you need some sustenance for that. Come on in. Let's have a coffee. Do you want a beer or anything else? You want something to eat?" And you're like, no, it's all good. But we eventually we stayed for coffee and then started the day with the first downhill. But yeah, it is, as we said, it is quite remote. So on the first two runs on Saturday, there was no one on those hiking trails. So that was, an hour downhill run, and there was literally no one. I don't think there was even a Strava segment on any of those runs, because that's, again, that's the flip side to all of this, right? So it's not upkept. There's no high traffic areas. It's not, people are not looking at it with the mindset of mountain bikers coming down those trails. And in some spots that means it works out quite nicely for mountain bikes. In others it means it's you need to get off and carry your bike for a couple of meters and then get back on. But yeah, so it was nice to have that, right? Because if you ride in Switzerland in some of the alpine spots that we usually ride, chances are you will find someone at some stage and run into someone, and which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something you have to be on the lookout for, especially when you're riding in, let's say, high traffic areas and high traffic times of the day. You can't be going at race pace because you have to be on the lookout for someone coming around the next corner. And we could actually, so that was not a worry this weekend. So certainly not on Saturday. On Sunday, there was a little bit more traffic on that path, just because that dam is apparently a popular hiking destination. So people, take the car to the highest most point that you can get to, and then hike up to the dam to enjoy the view. And it's a beautiful view up there. We can post some pictures later on, and then hike back down. And so as we rocked up to the dam, it was around 11, and they looked at us as if we were from a different planet. And it's like, what are you guys doing here? It's like, oh yeah, we're going to ride down to the valley again. And then so yeah, on the way down, obviously we met a couple of other hikers, and a lot of cheering, and they're like, "Come on, guys, you can do it!" on every difficult feature, and like being super impressed. So yeah, it was really nice to see.
All right, so back to my my last question. I wanted to end it with another question, actually, and it was: now that you've had this experience, would you rewrite your definition of remote?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I've done some really remote stuff here in Switzerland where you're off grid. You're even in Switzerland you're off grid, right? So we pride ourselves in our high coverage of mobile phone service. Where you're if something goes wrong, you're an hour, 2 hours, depending outside of let's say civilization, or you have to be flown out with a helicopter. Shout out to Rega, our national air rescue service. But then again, I've done some racing and touring in Canada, for example, where the definition of remote is very different than it is here, right? So because there you add the component of wildlife depending on where you are. We don't have the problems of bears or wolves or any of that in Switzerland necessarily. So in Canada, so for example, during the BC bike race, you are sometimes 10, 15, 20 kilometers away from the next civilization. Depending on if something goes wrong, then you're really out in the bush, and you need some serious help to get out there. And if you need to walk out, then that's a long day in the office, I would say. And but to bring that back to this weekend, I mean, yes, you're remote, and yes, you're in these mountain valleys that not many people go to, and apart from a couple of the locals that have their Alp huts there and spend the summer up there because it's too hot in the valley. So, I mean, there's, maybe within half an hour, you're somewhere where there's another hut or a refugio, so like a rescue hut or whatever, where you at least can find some cover and hopefully some kind of communication device. But yeah, I mean, the longest flight we did was I think 7 minutes. So you're not that. It's remote, yes, but it's not like you're a million miles away from civilization.
Yeah, as my time doing a little bit of guiding and as well as having like learned about avalanche safety and things, I was always motivated to carry a decent sized first aid kit. Did you have one on you?
Oh yeah, I always have one in my hip bag. So that's actually a leftover from BC Bike Race, because for people that have done the BC Bike Race, they or have not done but want to know about it, but is one of the minimum equipment requirements they have is that you have a first aid kit with. You need to have space blankets. You need to have a whistle. You need to have something to make a fire. You need to, because again, some of the parts of that race are pretty remote, so you need to be able to look after yourself. So you need the usual bandages and stuff like that. So I carried that, and we had 2 or 3 more. So if something really went horribly wrong, then I think we would have been in an okay position to look after ourselves. I brought my usual rescue bag for my bike stuff. With I think even Telmo brought a derailleur hanger this time, so the usual stuff that you need. And as it was actually the Johnny, the guide, he had a bit of a mishap on the second run of the day on Saturday, and tore parts of his derailleur off, so had to do a chainless run down the valley. And on a Saturday afternoon at around 4:00 in rural Italy, had to find another rear derailleur to be able to ride on Sunday, which magically, don't ask me how he did it, but somehow magically he managed to arrange for another derailleur. On the quick and easy, because when we rocked up to the Heli base for the last lift of the day, then he was already back with his fixed bike. So I guess he knows a guy.
Kudos, Johnny. Yeah, I can imagine with this crew things could get a little bit rowdy, but also there's definitely key individuals there that would help patch it all up and get out, because you have some pretty resourceful people in that group as well. But the day didn't go without more mishaps.
Oh yeah,
did you have a little bit of a oopsie?
I did have a little over the bars moment, and the funny thing with that was that there's a number of interesting things. So one, I made the silly mistake to not completely think through my equipment choice for this weekend. So I have a kit bag that I always use that is a very generous size. I think it can fit up to 46 liters. But the good thing is you can just throw all your stuff that you need for a weekend. You just throw it in the bag. It fits a helmet. You can put all your pads in there, water bottles, toiletries, whatever it is that you need. Throw it in there. Everything is fine. Put it on your back. Off you go. So I did that because that's what I normally do. And then as we rock up for the last lift on Saturday, and I look at the other guys, and everyone is having these tiny little backpacks, and I was like, what am I doing here with this big thing? And then, so I was like, didn't quite think through that I have to ride the whole day, the next day, with this big backpack. But yeah, anyway, so the good thing is that the backpack has a relatively good harness, so it wasn't too much of an issue. It's just that it was a bit bigger than I would have wanted. And of course, if someone has extra capacity in his backpack, that means that people are asking him to carry their stuff that they don't want to carry on their backpack. So I was carrying other people's rain jackets and the extra food that we still had in the hut. And so it was quite a big backpack in the end. But anyway, coming back to the mishap. So it was yeah. So as I said, it was a long run, and then we pull up to maybe the last section of trail, maybe another 50 meters. You could already see the road down where it ended. We got off the bikes, walked down a little bit to look at it, and then we started talking to each other and joking. It was like, oh, wouldn't that be funny? Come on, like the last piece of trail, and something happens here. Let's not have any false pride. If it doesn't work, just get off the bike and walk it. And then go back to the top, start riding, and then first few wobbles, it was like, yeah, that's not worth it. Got off the bike, walked it, and then after the feature, kind of got back on the bike, and it was literally straight down a stair. Really not that difficult, and but somehow managed to catch my wheel on one of the steps, and then as it happened, then get over the front of the bike, and then of course with the added dynamic of a heavy backpack, that kind of completely pushed me over the front of the bike, and then kind of went over the bars and down the side of the staircase. And then, of course, luckily managed to kind of turn myself around, so I landed on my backpack. So at the end of the day, the big backpack also saved my day. So I think I was pretty lucky, but it was unnecessary to have little over the bars moment 15 or 20 meters from the end of the last trail of the day.
Okay, Ride Dad. So you've had a few days to look back on the weekend. Sounds like a fabulous one, filled with highs and lows. What was one highlight and one key learning that you could send into our listeners' ears?
The highlight, and the highlight is for sure taking the heli, because that was the first time, probably the only time in my life that I will be flying a helicopter. And of course, the cool thing was that Johnny, our guide, he kind of knew all the guys that were working the base, and he knew the pilot. And of course, he would talk to him and be like, okay, those are my guys. You don't need to take the very, very, very safest route. You can, let it loose a little bit. And then, of course, in Italy, apparently the rules are a little bit more relaxed when it comes to where you fly and how you approach certain things. So he, in some instances, let it hang out a little bit. So when doing the drop-offs and then picking up the bike rack again, so kind of doing all the cool stuff that from ski movies and snowboard movies and all these kind of things. And of course, we were in the helicopter. We were all like, little 12-year-olds being super excited and being like, "Oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever!" So that was really, really cool. And because it was a birthday present for Beat, I think it was also, I think, a really, really cool experience for him. Maybe key learning. I think we've talked about it already on some other conversations. It's like, communication, and communication is I think it's just very, very important when you're moving around the mountain, and certainly in remote areas. There's obviously the misunderstanding with the flow, or it's not a misunderstanding, which just meant different things. But especially when you have a mixed group, you kind of you also want to make sure that everyone is kind of comfortable with where you ride and how you ride and what's coming up, etc. And so I think that as always is something that you need to make sure that when you go away for the next time with a group, that you're not quite sure what the level is of all the different riders. Is that up front you have kind of an understanding of what's coming, and is everyone okay with that? And if not, then you probably have to adapt your plans a little bit.
So your first helicopter ride sounds fantastic, but you also said that it will be your last helicopter ride. Why is that?
I'm not saying it's going to be the last helicopter ride, but I think because of course sometimes the helicopter is just the right tool for the job, and certainly the company that we were flying with, heli biking is not their business. They do that as a little service on the side for friends, is my understanding. Their main business is flying with the helicopter. They fly, worker crews up to the dams. They fly worker crews up to construction sites in the mountains. They fly materials up into the construction site. They service all these different alpine huts and refugios and all these kind of mountain infrastructure spots. As I say, heli biking is not featuring on their services list all too prominently. And of course there's the angle of the day and age that we live in. We are more aware of our CO2 footprint, etc. So again, if the helicopter is the right tool for the job, then of course I'm going to use a helicopter. Am I going to do multiple helicopter biking weekends going forward? Probably not, because I don't think that's very sustainable. But once it was a fantastic experience, I don't want to miss it, and I would think it was one of the cooler experiences when it comes to biking. That's for sure.
All right. Well, it sounds like it was a very conscious decision. So kudos to you and to the rest of the crew. Just want to say thanks for coming on to the podcast. Thanks for recapping your weekend. And to Beat, alles Gute zum Geburtstag.
Cool. Before we close out the show for good, let's just quickly do our spiel with the social and where you guys can find more information about the Skids and Giggles podcast. We're currently most active on our Instagram, where you can skid right into our DMs and follow along at Skids and Giggles, and you can find our website with all the relevant links and info under the URL skidsandgiggles.com. Also, if you guys like what we're doing and want to know what's up, just give us a follow on Spotify. Hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to great podcasts. Finally, please keep sharing your episodes with your friends and riding buddies. It really helps us expand our reach and talking to many, many more people like you. With that, let's close it out for the day. Talk to you guys the next time. Ciao, Bryson.
Ciao, Pascal.
Have a good one.
You too.